Alright, here, chapter 2. St. Augustine of Hippo, Nicene. This is by St. Augustine of Hippo, who lived in the 400s. Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers Series 1, Volume 2, City of God, Book 1, Chapter 2. This is translated by Philip Schaff et al. Chapter 2, that it is quite contrary to the usage of war that the victor should spare the vanquished for the sake of their gods. There are histories of numberless wars, both before the building of Rome and since its rise and extension of its domain, and since both before the building of Rome and since its rise and extension of its dominion. Let these be read, and let one instance be cited in which, when a city had been taken by foreigners, the victors spared those who were found to have fled for sanctuary to the temples of their gods. Or one instance in which a barbarian general gave orders that none should be put to the sword who had been found in this or that temple. Did not Aeneas see dying Priam at the shrine, staining the hearth he made divine? Did not Diomede Ulysses drag with red hands the sentries slain, her fateful image from your fane, her chaste locks touch and stain with gore the virginal coronal she wore? Neither is that true which follows, that thenceforth the tide of fortune changed, and Greece grew weak. For after this they conquered and destroyed Troy with fire and sword. After this they beheaded Priam as he fled to the altars. Neither did Troy perish because they lost Minerva. For what had Minerva herself first lost that she should perish? Her guards, perhaps? No doubt, just her guards. For as soon as they were slain, she could be stolen. It was not in fact the men who were preserved by the image, but the image by the men. How then was she invoked to defend the city and its citizens, she who could not defend her own defenders? And this goes into the theme in the Psalms when it's like idols can't breathe, they can't speak, they can't save you, they can't do anything, they can't deliver you, they can't. They're just mute. They don't have breath. They can't smell. They can't hear. They can't see. They can't talk. So don't worship idols like the Greek gods, and actually they're demons. Footnotes: the Benedictines remind us that Alexander and Xenophon, at least in some occasions, do. Virgil, Aeneid, II 501-2, the renderings of Virgil from Contingon. Alright, so let's go on to the next, chapter 3. Chapter 3, that the Romans did not show their usual sagacity when they trusted that they would be benefited by the gods who have been unable to defend Troy. And these be the gods, but to those whose protecting care the Romans were delayed to entrust their city. Oh, too piteous mistake, and they are enraged at us when we speak thus about their gods. Though so far from being enraged at their own writers, they part with money to learn what they say, and indeed the very teachers of these authors are reckoned worthy of a salary from the public purse and of other honors. Does Virgil, who is read by boys, know that this great poet, this most famous and approved of all poets, may impregnate their virgin minds and may not readily be forgotten by them, according to that saying of Horace, the fresh cask long keeps its first tang. On this Virgil, I say, Juno is introduced as hostile to the Trojans, and stirring up Aeolus, the king of the winds, against them in the words, "A race I hate now plows the sea, transporting Troy to Italy, and home gods conquered. And ought prudent men to have entrusted the defense of Rome to these conquered gods?" But it will be said, this was only the saying of Juno, who, like an angry woman, did not know what she was saying. What then, says Aeneas himself, Aeneas, who is so often designated Pius, does he not say, "Lo, Panthus escaped from death by flight, priest of Apollo on the height. His conquered gods with trembling hands he bears, and shelter swift demands"? Is it not clear that the gods whom he does not scruple to call conquered were rather entrusted to Aeneas than he to them, when it is said to them, "The gods of her domestic shrines your country to your care consigns"? If then Virgil says that the gods were such as these and were conquered, and that when conquered they could not escape except under the protection of a man, what a madness it is to suppose that Rome had been wisely entrusted to these guardians, and could not have been taken unless it had lost them. Indeed, to worship conquered gods as protectors and champions, what is this but to worship not good divinities but evil omens? Would it not be wiser to believe that Rome would never have fallen into so great a calamity had they not first perished, but rather they would have perished long ago, since not Rome preserved them as long as she could? For who does not see, when he thinks of it, what a foolish assumption it is that they could not be vanquished under vanquished defenders, and that they only perished because they had lost their guardian gods, when indeed the only cause of their perishing was that they chose their protector gods condemned to perish. The poets, therefore, when they composed and sang these things about the conquered gods, had no intention to admit falsehoods, but uttered dishonest men with the truth extorted from them. This, however, will be carefully and copiously discussed in another more fitting place. Meanwhile, I will briefly, and to the best of my ability, explain what I meant to say about these ungrateful men who blasphemously impute to Christ the calamities which they deservedly suffer in consequence of their own wicked ways, while that which is for Christ's sake spared them in spite of their wickedness they do not even take the trouble to notice, and in their mad and blasphemous insolence they use against his name those very lips wherewith they falsely claim that same name, that their lives might be spared. And the places consecrated to Christ, where for his sake no enemy would injure them, they restrained their tongues that they might be safe and protected. But no sooner did they emerge in these sanctuaries than they unbridled these tongues to hurl against him curses full of hate. And there's quotations from Horace, Aeneid, and I guess this non-numina. Where is this? Non numina bona sed omnia mala. It's the Latin version. Chapter 4 on the asylum of Juno and Troy, which saved no one from the Greeks, and of the churches of the apostles, which protected from the barbarians all who fled to them. Troy itself, the mother of the Roman people, was not able, as I have said, to protect its own citizens and the sacred places of their gods from the fire and sword of the Greeks, though the Greeks worshipped the same gods. Not only so, but Phoenix and Ulysses fell in the void courts by Juno's cell, where set the spoils to keep, snatched from the burning shrines away. Their Elam's mighty treasure lay, rich altars, bowls of massy gold, and captive raiment rudely rolled in one promiscuous heap, while boys and matrons, wild with fear and long array, were standing near. In other words, the place consecrated to so great a goddess was chosen, not that from it none might be led out a captive, but that in it all the captives might be immured. Now, what does immured mean? That's not a word that I'm very familiar with. I'm trying to get the I. Immured. Immured. Enclose or confine someone against their will. Like in prison. In other words, the place consecrated to so great a goddess was chosen, not that from it none might be led out a captive, but that in it all the captives might be imprisoned or immured. Compare now this asylum, the asylum not of an ordinary god, not of one of the rank and file of gods, but of Jove's own sister and wife, the queen of all the gods. But the church is built in memory of the apostles. Into it were collected the spoils rescued from the blazing temples and snatched from the gods, not that they might be restored to the vanquished, but divided among the victors, while into these was carried back, with the most religious observance and respect, everything which belonged to them, even though found elsewhere. Their liberty was lost, here preserved. Their bondage was strict, here strictly excluded. Into that temple men were driven to become the chattels of their enemies, now lording it over them. Into these churches men were led by their relenting foes, that they might be at liberty. In fine, the gentle Greeks appropriated that temple of Juno to the purposes of their own avarice and pride, while these churches of Christ were chosen, even by the savage barbarians, the fit scenes for humility and mercy. But perhaps, after all, the Greeks did in that victory of theirs spare the temples of those gods whom they worshipped in common with the Trojans, and did not dare to put to the sword or make captive the wretched and vanquished Trojans who fled thither. And perhaps Virgil, in the manner of the poets, has depicted what never really happened. But there is no question that he depicted the usual custom of an enemy when sacking the city. And it says, though levis was the word usually employed to signify the inconstancy of the Greeks, it is only used here in opposition to the imminence of the following clause to indicate the Greeks were more civilized than the barbarians, and not relentless, but, as we say, easily moved. And this is from the Aeneid by Virgil 761. Come on. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Caesar's statement regarding the universal custom of an enemy when sacking a city. Even Caesar himself gives us positive testimony regarding this custom, for in his deliverance in the Senate about the conspirators, he says, as Sallust, a historian of distinguished veracity, writes in De Conj Cat, cu. 51, that virgins of boys are violated, children torn from the embrace of their parents, matrons subjected to whatever should be the pleasure of the conquerors, temples and houses plundered, slaughter and burning rife, in fine, all things filled with arms, corpses, blood, and wailing. If he had not mentioned temples here, he might suppose that enemies were in the habit of sparing the dwelling of the gods, and the Roman temples were in danger of these disasters, not from foreign foes, but from Catiline and his associates, the most noble senators and citizens of Rome. but these, it may be said, were abandoned men and the parricides of their fatherland. Chapter 6. That not even the Romans, when they took cities, spared the conquered in their temples. Why then need our argument take note of the many nations who have waged wars with each other, and have nowhere spared the conquered in the temples of their gods? Let us look at the practice of the Romans themselves. As I say, recall and review the Romans, whose chief praise it has been to spare the vanquished and subdue the proud, and that they preferred rather to forgive than to revenge an injury. And among so many great cities which they have stormed, taken, and overthrown for the extension of their dominion, let us be told what temples they were accustomed to exempt, so whoever took refuge in them was free. Or have they really done this, and has the fact been suppressed by the historians of these events? Is it to be believed that men who sought out with the greatest eagerness points they could praise would omit those which, in their own estimation, are the most signal proofs of piety? Marcus Marcellus, a distinguished Roman who took Syracuse, a most splendidly adorned city, is reported to have bewailed its coming ruin, and to have shed his own tears over it before he spilt its blood. He took steps also to preserve the chastity even of his enemy, for before he gave orders for the storming of the city, he issued an edict forbidding the violation of any free person. Yet the city was sacked according to the custom of war, nor do we anywhere read that even by so chaste and gentle a commander orders were given that no one should be injured who had fled to this or that temple. And this certainly would by no means have been omitted, when neither his weeping nor his edict preservative of chastity could be passed in silence. Fabius, the conqueror of the city of Tarentum, is praised for abstaining from making booty of the images. For when his secretary proposed the question to him what he wished done with the statues of the gods which had been taken in large numbers, he veiled his moderation under a joke. For he asked of what sort they were, and when they reported to him that they were not only many large images, but some of them armed, oh, he says, let us leave with the Tarentines their angry gods. Seeing then that the writers of Roman history could not pass in silence neither the weeping of the one general nor the laughing of the other, neither the chaste piety of the one nor the facetious moderation of the other, on what occasion would it be omitted if, for the honor of any of their enemies' gods, they had shown this particular form of leniency, that in any temple slaughter or captivity was prohibited? The Romans would sack temples. Chapter 7. That the cruelties which occurred in the sack of Rome were in accordance with the custom of war, whereas acts of clemency resulted from the influence of Christ's name. All the spoiling then which Rome was exposed to in the recent calamity, all the slaughter, plundering, burning, and misery was the result of the custom of war. What was novel was that savage barbarians showed themselves in so gentle a guise that the largest churches were shown and set apart for the purpose of being filled with the people to whom quarter was given, and that in them none were slain, from them none forcibly dragged, that into them many were led by their relenting enemies to be set at liberty, and that from them none were led into slavery by merciless foes. Whoever does not see this is to be attributed to the name of Christ, to the Christian temper, is blind. Whoever sees this and gives no praise is ungrateful. Whoever hinders anyone from praising it is mad. Far be it from any prudent man to impute this clemency to the barbarians. Their fierce and bloody minds were awed and bridled and marvelously tempered by him who so long before said by his prophet, I will visit their transgression with the rod, and their iniquities with stripes. Nevertheless, my loving kindness will I not utterly take from them. That's from Psalm 32. Okay, I'm going to take a break here, and I'll keep reading.